Hey everyone, I'm Scott Brandley.
And I'm Alicia Coakley. Every member of the church has a story to share, one that can instill faith, invite growth, and inspire others.
On today's episode, we're going to hear how divorce, custody battles, and even homelessness taught one woman how to turn life storms into her purpose. Welcome to Latter-day Lights. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Latter-day Lights. We're so glad you're here with us today, and we're really excited to introduce our special guest, Bethany Harger, to the show. Bethany, welcome.
Hi, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out to us. We always love when we don't have to go track people down. it's always like a nice one less thing that we have to do. So we really appreciate it.
How did you find the show, Bethany?
I saw a post that Alicia had on Facebook, and it came up just as I had been receiving some promptings that it was time to start speaking and being a little bit more vocal about my story. There was a time that I needed to hide the story, and then which is part of what you'll hear today, and then about a year that I chose to hide from it. And so when I saw Alicia's post asking for stories of Latter-day Saints, I decided to reach out.
Awesome.
That is really cool. And I'm excited because your story has so many different like facets and avenues. And I just feel like there's going to be so many different people that can resonate with different parts of your story. So I think it's going to be, it's just going to be a great episode. I just know it.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us, before you start with your story and everything like that, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Bethany, and I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. I am the youngest of 6 children. 5 of us are living. My mom had a full-term stillborn about 18 months before me. I spent the majority of my life in Phoenix. I lived overseas in Saudi Arabia for a couple of years with my parents when I was younger.
Cool.
Yeah, that was a really fun experience. And then I served a mission for my church. I went to Chicago and I served Spanish speaking, and I left the Midwest. I absolutely loved my mission. And I said I would never, ever live in the Midwest again because of the cold and the weather and the humidity and all the things. I was born in the church, from both parents come from pioneer heritage. Went through a series of life storms that ultimately brought me back to the Midwest, and I now live in southwestern Iowa in just a little small town.
Wow. That's really cool. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the Midwest. Well, I guess I'm not a fan of humidity. That's probably just more accurate. So anything that falls into that humidity range, I'm not a fan. I don't like to sweat.
I agree.
For any reason. I don't like being uncomfortable. Yeah. So I don't know if I can make it back there. But I guess if the Lord calls me really loudly, like with a megaphone, then maybe I'll do it.
This was pretty loud and unmistakable. So it's ended up being a huge blessing in my life.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to hear more about that. So we'll just go ahead and turn the time over to you. Why don't you tell us where your story begins?
My story kind of begins when I was in my early 20s, and I returned home from my mission. I had gone a little bit later because I was determined I was just going to get married. I didn't want to serve a mission, and that didn't happen. I heard the Spirit tell me that I would get married after I served a mission. So I decided to go ahead and go so that I could come home and get married. That was all I ever really wanted, was to be a wife and a mom. And I felt like that was what I was called to do in this life. And it wasn't for me. That wasn't a cultural thing, being raised in the church. It was what my heart desired. That was really what I wanted. So I got home from my mission, and I met a returned missionary, and we were married in the temple. And unexpectedly, I got pregnant right away. So just before our first anniversary, I had our first child. He's my only son. And a year after that, 13 months of the day, I had my second, which was my little girl, and my first girl. And then when she was 4 months old, my mom passed away. And at the time that my mom passed away, it's probably when my story really began. I started struggling pretty severely with depression. I shouldn't say started. The depression and anxiety that I had just became worse. It wasn't something that was really looked at when I was a child because they didn't know. I can look back at my childhood and it's very clear what was going on with me, but it wasn't really known. My husband at the time took my mom's death pretty hard. They were very close. He was loved by everybody in my family. He was super charming and charismatic. And between the struggles that he had, which were a lot of addictions, he struggled with multiple addictions and eventually he went back to things that happened before his mission, in addition to alcohol, prescription pain pills. Later, which was after we divorced, it became smoking marijuana, which was for medicinal purposes, but it was constant. It's hard to justify constant. There was really no breaks from the stories that I would hear from my children. So before our divorce, I can't even say that I was surviving. We talk about surviving, thriving. I was existing. My heart beat and I was breathing, and that was the extent. I spent the majority of my time was spent in bed. I would get up to go to work, which I worked nights, and then I would just come home and go back to bed. By this point, I had had my third child, which was my second daughter. And she grew up. Her first few years were spent next to me in bed watching cartoons. That was the extent of what I felt I could give to my family. And at the time, I prayed regularly that they would know that I loved them. That was, I can't say in any real sense of the term that I was a good mom at the time. I just wasn't. I didn't have the tools and resources that I needed to be the mom that I had always dreamed of being. So by 2013, I was divorced from my first husband, and then I went through single parenthood with 3 young children. I had I think it was 11, 12, and 6 at the time, or 10, 11, and 6. They were little. And so thrown back into the workforce. Now I had been working, but now I was working solely for with just by myself. And before I had worked at night so that I could still be home during the day, although that wasn't super effective because I still wasn't I wasn't productive during the day. Right. So a couple of years later, I ended up meeting somebody else, and I was remarried in 2015, and I was 40 at the time. And I became pregnant.
Wow.
Which was exciting. We wanted to have a baby. I had been told I couldn't have any more children after my third. I'd had multiple miscarriages over the years. And so here I was, 40 and newly married and pregnant. And my second husband he was on the autism spectrum and had some mental health struggles, but not to the severity that I knew when we got married. And the first year of our marriage was pretty fantastic. So I was pregnant. It was fantastic in the sense of our relationship was pretty great. He did an amazing job taking care of me. There were so many struggles during the pregnancy. Because of his mental health and the disability that went along with it, I knew that I was going to be the primary breadwinner, and I was okay with that because he was really so good to me. So I had started college, And during the time that I was pregnant, all three of my older kids got walking pneumonia to some extent. They were so sick. I was horribly sick. 21 weeks pregnant, I had an emergency abdominal surgery. My gallbladder was almost to the point of rupturing. Nobody was really looking at my gallbladder. By the time I was in surgery, my surgeon said, "Haven't you been sick?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm pregnant." They just kept giving me medications for nausea.
Right.
21 weeks along, and I had an emergency abdominal surgery, which she survived. But I continued to be really sick. I went into preterm labor at 31 weeks. I didn't know that you could be in labor for 8 weeks, but I was in labor for 8 weeks, in and out of the hospital. Ultimately, she came at 39 weeks and she was healthy and she did great. Two of the children of my older kids were suffering pretty significantly from mental health struggles. And then my husband's mental health began declining. But because he had been so good to me in the beginning, I could see who he really was. And so it kind of snuck up on me slowly and then it progressively got worse. So in the summer of 2019, we had come back to Iowa. So my husband is from Iowa, and we had come back for his 25th high school graduation, the reunion. And he was not coming back home with me. We were separating to try and get my bearings, but I was really, really close. I am still really close to his mom. She was one of my biggest advocates and best friends. And I ended up having a mental breakdown. I just stayed here I stayed in Iowa for a month. And I was living in Phoenix, or in the East Valley in Chandler, metropolitan Phoenix. I was living there, stayed in Iowa for a month. That meant leaving my 3-year-old with my newly 18-year-old daughter in charge. And it was a lot, but my kids just knew that I needed it. And so they rallied around at home and so I had a 19, 18, and 12-year-old at the time, or 13. Newly adult children, plus the preteen and then the baby.
Right.
So I stayed in Iowa for about a month, and then I returned home, and I was introduced to a friend. She wasn't a friend at the time, but I was introduced to this woman, and she introduced me to what's called the Fusion U program, which was a nonprofit organization in the East Valley in Arizona that offered services that had like coaching and mental wellness. They did a lot of creative processing, and it was with the idea that if you can empower a woman, you empower communities. And so this was a 6-month program that I went through that kind of opened my mind to the power of our thoughts. And I started to feel more empowered within my circumstances. And this girl, Shawnee, that has since become one of my closest friends, she encouraged me to listen to the Rare Faith podcast, which Rare Faith is ultimately where Alicia and I connected.
Yes.
And so I started listening to this podcast, and I just was absorbing it. Like it was this language that my soul knew, but I had forgotten. And
I love that description of it. I will 100% vouch. That is exactly the way that I feel. Yeah. That's awesome. Sorry to interrupt. So go ahead.
Oh no, it is. It truly was like this language that I feel like my spirit had forgotten. And as soon as it was introduced to it, it couldn't get enough.
Yes.
And it correlated with my beliefs. I didn't feel like there was anything outside of what I already believed in. In fact, it was helping me in my testimony of what I believed in.
Mm-hmm.
And so during this time, I graduated magna cum laude when I was 44. And had been through so many challenges. So having got through school in 4 years was a huge feat in itself. And I felt like my whole entire world was finally opening. Like it was just opening up for me as I was in my first internship. But COVID shut that world down. It didn't just shut it down for me, it shut it down for everybody. So literally the world was shut down, and that world that I felt like I was finally figuring out was gone. And my internship closed because they didn't really need a remote intern. And so here I am. I had no clue. I had no clue where I was going or what I was supposed to do. And at the time I was, so if you're familiar with Phoenix, Arizona, it's hot. And because of how sick I was when I was pregnant and all that I was trying to navigate, we had moved in with my sister when I was still pregnant with my littlest. And so at this time, by the time I graduated, we had converted the garage to like a room. So I was living in a garage with my husband. And then the kids were in the main part of the house with my sister. And we went back and forth, but it was still a garage. Like our bedroom had the garage door opener above my bed. We made do.
Yeah.
But it's what I needed to do to get through school. And it felt like it was worth that sacrifice. And so at this point, I'm like, there's no point. Everything that I just did was no point, because I don't even know what I'm going to do at this point with my degree, because I was now 45 years old trying to enter a new career field in the middle of a pandemic. And it just was not the best recipe for what I wanted for my family. But I had continued listening to Leslie Householder's work, reading her books, holding on to the things that I was learning. And in May of 2020, I attended my first Genius Boot Camp, which is a 3-day workshop that she facilitates. And all I wanted was to not live in this garage anymore. I just wanted my own place and a job, and I wanted to take care of my family. I started applying what I had learned in Genius Boot Camp, and I just did one principle after another. And in the summer of 2020 is when I moved across the country to Iowa. And there's a whole story behind that, but it would just make this long. But it was a God thing that said this is where I needed to be. I truly felt that by living close to my mother-in-law, that it would heal my marriage and help us get back to where we had been. And so I moved from Arizona to Iowa in the middle of this pandemic with no resources, no job prospects, and I was buying a house. Like I was under contract in a house. So I felt like I figured this out. Like I can live these rare faith principles, and I can use faith and achieve my dreams. I felt like I was on top of the world. But the very first night we were exhausted, 3 days of traveling, and I go to put my daughter, my littlest, she was 4 by this time. I go to put her in the bath, and there's no water running to the bathtub. So the only other thing that we had was a shower upstairs, which is not easy to shower a 4-year-old. And that led to, again, I'm giving cliff notes of kind of each thing along the way, but between the water issues, there was housing issues. The contract that I was under ended up being an illegal contract because the deed to the house was left and it was stuck in a bankruptcy. We couldn't close on the house anyway. So I thought, and in the middle of this, my husband he was completely, the emotional and verbal abuse had become so extensive that I could no longer keep him in the home. And so we separated permanently at that point. And his mom came and picked him up. And I want to emphasize that whereas my first divorce, there was choices made, that he made choices that led to what happened. And I did too. Not that he was the only one at fault, but there was actual, just choices made from a clear mind. In my second marriage, he has severe mental health issues. And so I am so grateful because I had that year with him, that I saw who this man was when the mental health wasn't out of control. And that's actually important as I go down into what happened with the custody dispute. So my littlest was 4 at the time, and my 14-year-old had come to Iowa. My older two My oldest two kids were living on their own at this point, college, and like they were adults and doing the young adult thing on their own. So ultimately we had to leave this house that I was in. So now I was single again. I was still struggling with jobs. I was doing contract work and I was self-employed. So there was some stuff, but it was still just a really hard time. And we ended up moving into another home in a rental in a little town called Avoca. And during this time, we were preparing my oldest daughter for her mission. So she had come to stay with us. We moved her out of college. She came to stay with us before her mission. But we started having another set of plumbing issues. It got to the point that we had the sewer was leaking into the walls. The ceiling caved in my 5-year-old's room.
Oh my gosh.
I've got my daughter MTCing upstairs, and there's black mold downstairs. And the advice was that I needed to get my children out before the cold hit because it wasn't safe to live there any longer.
Wow.
And it was about this time that my oldest tried to take his life, and he was in Georgia. But I was also learning of the significant mental health struggles of my 14-year-old. So I couldn't take care of both. So my ex-husband and his new wife drove to Georgia and got my oldest out of the hospital and drove him back to Arizona. While I'm trying to get my one daughter on a mission, we need to leave the house that we were in, and the severity of what we were dealing with my 14-year-old felt more than I could do.
Mm-hmm.
I desperately needed to feel some peace. And so I called up my Relief Society president, who by this time was a really close friend of mine. And I asked her if I could come for her husband to give me a blessing. And so I went over there one evening. And I told him, I said, I just need to find some peace. Like I need something to work out. And so as he gave me this blessing, he did not tell me what I wanted to hear. And he said that the peace I was looking for was not going to come, and that I needed to learn to find the peace in within and develop that.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
And when he ended the prayer, it was just silence. And I looked at him and I said, that's not what I wanted to hear. And he was tear-filled eyes. He says, that's not what I wanted to say.
Oh.
So I left that night. I can't say that I left feeling better. In fact, it felt really heavy because I'm like, I don't know how to find peace. There was no more housing prospects. We didn't know what we were going to do. I mean, it wasn't even like there was something there that I couldn't afford. There was just nothing.
Wow.
And my 14-year-old had become so integrated in our youth group here in Iowa, our young women's group. She threatened me to not move back. She did not want to go back to Arizona, which was shocking. That's why we were staying, was this girl that had become just enmeshed within our young women's group. And so the decision for her sake was to stay. And I was trusting that my son in Arizona was going to get what he needed. And we were in contact. I was in contact with him through the time. But without anywhere to go, and we had to get out of this house, my 14-year-old ended up going to stay with the young women's president. I actually can't remember if she had been released yet or not, but she had been the young women's president earlier, and she was good friends with them because I had to move in with my mother-in-law with my little, and she has this little 900 square foot house. There was actually, the basement has square footage also, but my brother-in-law lived there. And so upstairs there was 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, just a little, really small home. And my 6-year-old and I began sharing. We just shared a twin size bed in the corner of the sewing room. And we really thought it was going to be just a few weeks. It was just going to be really temporary. It ended up being 8 months. And eventually my 14-year-old came to live with us. And so in the little tiny corner of this room, I shared bunk beds with my 16-year-old was on top and myself and the 6-year-old were on the bottom. And it was really hard, but there were so many nights that I would never give up the conversations that were had. I mean, who gets to sit under your 16-year-old and laugh in the middle of the night while trying to shush so that the little one doesn't get woke up? By this point, I had made the decision to file for divorce. So I'm living with my mother-in-law while divorcing her son. And, you know, it always, what she and I like to talk about is that it's weird that it's not weird. So there was never a single argument. There was never a single altercation. How many people can stay that long? I mean, it's hard for a lot of people to go to dinner with a mother-in-law, let alone live with them. And she was amazing. There were times that we all kind of retreated to our own little corners to avoid the contention. But it was an amazing time. We have such amazing memories. So now I'm in the middle of my second divorce, and I am the girl that I was going to grow up and I was going to get married in the temple and I was going to be a stay-at-home mom. And that was my dream. And that was all shattered. It was just completely shattered. And alongside this, I had become a Rare Faith facilitator. And so I get to go, and now I'm teaching Genius boot camps, and I'm telling people about how you can use these principles to reach your dreams and to fulfill your dreams, and you can draw closer to your Heavenly Father. And then I would shut those Zoom rooms down and I would just go to bed, because I felt like the biggest fraud. I'm sitting here telling people, I either felt like a fraud or I felt really angry. Like, why do I have to teach this to other people? And I felt like I needed to keep teaching it. Like I was just called. I couldn't let it go. And yet my family was suffering, suffering. But I decided that I was going to write a relationship vision. And so at this point I was filing for divorce, and I post-dated it because it's just a principle that we teach within Rare Faith. And I put it far enough out that it would feel believable, but not so far out that it wouldn't be achievable. Like, I just felt like I would never get there. And so it was about the fall of 2021. And I wrote the date at the top, July 31st, 2023. I am so happy and grateful to be in a healthy marriage relationship. And then I went on, it was, about 2 pages long. And I wrote everything that I just would really love to experience in every aspect of a marriage and in every aspect of a relationship. And I was really particular to make sure that I wrote it in a way that it would allow my husband to step into that space if he chose to be. So I wasn't trying to reject him, but I really wanted to be in a healthy marriage. The divorce continued. And then out of left field, my ex-husband in Arizona decided to file for custody and have my 16-year-old removed from me. And so for all of 2022, I was going through a custody dispute in 2 states with 2 men, and I needed to hire 2 different attorneys. For part of that time, I was also homeless. Our joke is that we were homeless, but not roofless. We had a roof over our head, but we didn't have a place of our own. And I went through a barrage of character attacks. I would need to sit in this virtual courtroom because I was able to do it. Thankfully for COVID, that was one of the good things with COVID, is how much was able to go virtual. So I didn't have to keep flying back to Arizona. But my daughter had made it very, very clear that if she had to live with her dad, she would end her life. And so it wasn't like I was just fighting for custody. I was trying to keep her alive. When I say that this blessing of living in Iowa, I have never been enveloped by the kind of love that my community and my ward family provided here. The resources continue to show up. I've really never witnessed anything like it. It's one thing when you experience that from your family, because I feel like your family has to, right? That's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
But when it's just people that see your potential and nothing else, because there wasn't anything else to see at that time except potential, I experienced God's love in an entirely different way. And there was a day that my daughter and I had got into town from the town that we were living in. We had to go into the city to do some shopping. And I remember feeling like, what is the point of, like, everything was falling apart. Like the whole world was just falling down around me. And while we had been driving, we noticed that someone had set fires. And so this was maybe February-ish. So it was really dry outside. It had been a really cold, dry winter. And so it was just stark and brown. And then I on my own had to go back into the city probably a month later. And then we had our first rain for spring. And as I was driving home, I noticed that these patches that had previously been black were this lush, thriving green. And it was so stark right up next to the brown, dead grass that hadn't been affected by the fire. And I remember thinking, I wonder if the Lord is just clearing my path, like this controlled burn, so to speak, so that growth could happen quicker than if that didn't happen. And I kind of held on to that one little thought, and I wrote about it and took a picture because it was a pretty amazing picture. I ended up we finally moved out into another little tiny town, and it was not the best house. It was it just really wasn't, it was gross, but it was ours. And we finally, we were on our own. And I had written in the process of this, I had written a goal statement that I needed to have my own place by July 1st. I needed to have something figured out by July 1st. And I remember on June 30th, so the night before July 1st, I was just crying with a friend. And I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And she said, Bethany, it's not July 1st. And I said, it's June 30th. Like, it was 6 p.m. And she said, I know, it's not July 1st. Mm-hmm. And in Rare Faith, we have this thing, it's from the books, we say it's not Tuesday yet. So she was using that against me because it was not July 1st. Well, July 1st came and something popped up, and I signed a lease on July 1st. And we were able to have, yeah.
Wow.
So she loves to use this. The July 1st incident is what, we like to laugh about that. So we did. We had our own place, and it wasn't the greatest, but it was ours, and we just were overjoyed. My divorce finalized with my 5-year-old, or 6, she was 6 by this time. And I was given full legal and physical custody, and my ex-husband got needed supervised visits. And this was nothing short of miraculous. I've been told by my attorney, other attorneys that I've met, and parents that they do not give full custody here. It's just unheard of. Honestly, short of pedophilia involved, they don't give full custody, even if abuse is involved. And to have received this, like I said, it was miraculous because we never had DCFS involvement. This came without ever having to put my little through the trauma that would have had to have happened in order to get this kind of custody. Mm-hmm. And so it was one of those things that popped up that was this huge miracle. But I was still involved in the custody dispute with my ex-husband in Arizona. So in February of 2023, we had a mental health incident, and my daughter was hospitalized. And when I got her out of the hospital, I just needed a break. So this friend that I'm talking about, July 1st, she said it's not July 1st. She lives in Missouri, and she said, just come, like, just get away and come here. And so I had made all of the arrangements. My little was going to go stay with grandma, and my teenager and I were going down to Missouri to stay for about a week. But it got postponed by about a week because I went home, told my daughter, let's go for a walk. We went on a walk, and I slipped on ice and got a concussion.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, no.
Oh, my God.
It just felt like it was constantly, yeah. It was this little tiny patch of ice, and my feet went up, and I don't hardly remember, except that I mean, that's the point of a concussion. You don't have a lot of the memory. So, we did ultimately end up we got to Missouri. And when we were going to church with her, I just kept feeling like I needed to ask for a blessing, which felt weird because her husband's not a member. And so I don't know anybody here, but I finally said, you know what, Jimmy, I think that I need a blessing. So it happened to be when we were at church that there was the high councilman that was speaking in her ward that day is the same one that taught her temple prep classes. And she says, that's the one. And so he gave me a blessing. And I don't remember. All he knew about me was that I was a single mom who was struggling and just needed some time away. That was the extent of what he knew about my story. And I should back up just a little bit. Once my divorce was finalized, I had been separated by that point for about 2 years. So it wasn't, and I had been working on myself. I had been working on my emotional healing. And so it wasn't like it was all new. It was just the paperwork at that end. And man, one of my friends in my ward was all over it. She had actually created LDS Single Mingles. It's a Marco Polo group.
Oh, wow.
But she was the founder of it. Now, at this point, she had let go of it because she was remarried. But she's like, Bethany, we got to get you hooked up. And I said, no, I'm done. Like, I'm done with men. I can't. I mean, I had just gone through I'm still in the middle of this character attack with one. I had gone through it with the first one. I said, I'm done. I can't. So now I'm in Missouri, and I asked for this blessing. And in the middle of his blessing, he kind of paused. And I knew that he was being guided by the Spirit because there were words that he said that I had written in my journal 2 days before. Sitting on the bed in my friend's house, I was journaling. And so I knew that he wasn't just saying words. Like, there's no way that he could have known that those words came from inside of me 2 days before.
Mm-hmm.
And so he paused, and he told me, he said, the Lord does not want me to give up on all my dreams of marriage, and that everything I had been wanting was on its way. And it was so shocking the way that because it really wasn't the direction of the blessing. And so he paused, he says this piece, and then he goes right back to what he was before. And I was so shocked. I'm sitting in there, and I opened my eyes because even though we're in the middle of the blessing, and I look in front of me, and my daughter and my friend have these huge eyes like, oh my gosh, she's going to lose it. She's going to leave the room. And then we all closed our eyes, and he finished the blessing, and we just loved our time there. And then we went back home. Like that was it. But I kept feeling like I needed to listen to the blessing and kind of step back into the dating world. And there's a lot of that backstory before the whole dating, but it shows how much I really just didn't want. I had lost the hope of all those dreams.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, I am, late 40s, and I had been alone for a long time. Even in my marriages, I was just alone most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we were laying in the same bed or sleeping in the same room, the loneliness was just consuming. And I just didn't want, I would rather have been lonely and alone than lonely in a marriage.
Yeah.
It was better that way.
Yeah.
And so I really only stepped back into dating because of this blessing. And I felt like I should at least try. And I remember one time I was driving, it was shortly after this, I was back home, but I was I was so mad. And I'm like, no, Heavenly Father, you don't get to tell me this. Like, you don't get to open this door to all my dreams. You're going to have to just put this guy in front of me. He's just going to have to show up in front of me. And that kind of happened. I made some poor choices when I got back into the dating world. Nothing was catastrophic. I just probably went on some dates I shouldn't have gone on with men that I shouldn't have gone out with. But I had just felt like, you know what? I did the LDS men, and that didn't work out so good.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't care. Like, if he's going to treat me with respect at this point, like, I'll go out with anybody, but they, as long as they can treat me with respect. Now, remember, I've got this vision that was kind of in the background. I had written it a year and a half before, or more than that before then. And then the end of May 2023, I was supposed to be going to Arizona. I was going to trial with my ex-husband. And I heard back from my attorney that the report from the court-appointed advisor, which is a forensic psychologist that had been appointed by the judge to interview all of the parties, there was a lot of he said, she said. And so it's hard for a judge to discern. So a lot of times they'll appoint a forensic psychologist to kind of make some determinations. And that report came back the week before my trial, and it corroborated everything that I had said. It said that it was about a 13-page report, but within that it suggested that the father receive intervention and help, and that he was unable to fully understand the severity of the mental health. And so I was planning to go to trial. It was a 2-day trial or an all-day trial. It was going to be a long trial. And the litigation was over. His attorney reached out to my attorney, and a settlement was reached. By this point, my daughter was 17. She was less than a year before her 18th birthday. And so it was determined that all visits should stop until if and when her mental health care team deemed it appropriate. We knew that just wasn't going to happen before she was 18. And so I knew that I was finally free. Like, I just felt like I could keep this little girl, she's not little, she's 17, but both litigations at that point were over. We just needed to sign the actual agreement that had been brought up. And I had a lot of conversations with God, and I remembered this July 31st, and I said, I can't hold on to this dream. I can't hold on to this past July 31st. And the answer that I felt back was, that's enough. Like, that was okay. And so as a facilitator for Rare Faith, one of the things that we teach is called guided mindset mastery, which is, have you done it, Alicia?
I'm doing it right now.
It's amazing.
It's so good. It is so good. Yeah.
It is. Now, the curriculum is written in a way that's to achieve financial goals, because that was Leslie and Trevin's pain point when it was written, but it can be applied to any goal. And so I was teaching a guided mindset mastery, and I had decided that I had a very intentional goal. And that was that by the end of the guided mindset mastery, which happened to just be just before July, that I would be in a healthy relationship. And I figured by this point, it wouldn't have been a marriage relationship, because I would need time to get to know the person. And there, all of that was, it just felt like there wasn't enough time for that, but I would have been okay. I would have felt like the dream was realized if I was just in a healthy relationship that was moving towards marriage. Which is when this like dating chaos, it was crazy. Like, I didn't really date before my first marriage. He was the first person I dated. And then I only dated a couple of people, and then I married my second husband. So I wasn't like a dater. Like, that wasn't a thing for me. And I was really self-conscious. And so it was very odd for me to like this speed dating. It was And I was just, again, I was just done. And I just felt so lost. And I was so angry. I call them Dear Father letters, where I just write these letters to my Heavenly Father. And I feel like it's more productive for me than just prayer. I feel like it's just more personal and I receive the revelation better. Mm-hmm. But this one was angry. Like it was a hate letter to God. And I'm so grateful to understand that He is a Heavenly Father. And how many times have you had the door slammed in your face with your teenager telling you that they hated you? Like it just happens. When you're a parent, you're going to have a kid at some point tell you that they hate you. And I feel like that's how He sees us. When we're throwing our little temper tantrums, it's like, I know. Like he can take it.
He can take it. Mm-hmm.
He can totally take it. So I wrote this whole hate letter, and then I burned it because I do these, I kind of combined that with the write and burn activity, and I burned it, and I just sat there and I took this big breath and I heard the words enter my mind. Even if you see me that way, will you still serve me? And I went to bed that night feeling so defeated. Like I didn't want to do it anymore, but I was an ordinance worker and I had a shift the next morning. Oh. So I got up the next morning. Actually, I was not going to go to my shift the next morning because I didn't have enough gas money. And I'm like, see, I can't actually serve you because I don't have enough gas money. Like this little belligerent. I'm such a belligerent child sometimes. That was me growing up.
You are a redhead. I mean.
So this is actually not natural, but I do carry the redhead gene. I have a redhead. My son is. I hold it with pride. I think that I wear it well. That's actually a joke in our family. So I went to bed feeling like I'm not going to be able to go to my shift because there's not enough gas in my car. And I received a message from my 17-year-old upstairs that said, "Hey, are you going to your shift tomorrow? I know you don't have gas. I have $17.
Aww.
So my daughter's last $17 was put into my car so that I could drive the hour to the temple and go serve in my shift. And the level, she's so sweet. She's such a good kid. But I was still like, I wasn't feeling a lot of hope. But for one of my rotations, I was just at the front desk taking temple recommends. And so there tends to be a lot of like quiet time, you kind of get the rush of people coming in. And so I pulled out the Book of Mormon, decided to just open it and see if there was anything that the Lord wanted to say. So I just flipped the scriptures open and my eyes land on the verse at the top of the page on the left-hand side, which was 4th Nephi 1:11. And it said, "And they were married and given in marriage, and were blessed according to the multitude of promises which the Lord had made unto them." And it was clear that was being spoken to me, but I'm like, really? I said July 31st, and we're pushing June. Like, I couldn't see. I mean, I could see that He was speaking to me, but I couldn't see past where I was. But I was looking forward to going to Arizona because I got to visit friends and family and my kids couldn't wait. By this time, I was so over like even the dating that I had pulled my name off of any of the profiles that there are. And I was just done. And then I got an email from LDS Singles, and I had never I'd never paid for a subscription. And so it was odd that I got this email. Well, I didn't know at the time that if you remove the app from your phone, it doesn't delete your profile. It just removes the app. They can still send you the email notifications. So I get this email that says, I've received a message on my profile and, click here to see the message. So I was like, okay. So I click the message only for it to say, please pay for a subscription for you to see your message. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I don't want the message that bad. I didn't want it. I didn't care at this point. But then there's the curiosity thing. And I'm like, you know what? For a single month, it's $49.99. And I felt the Spirit say, just get this message. Just get this message.
Wow.
And I was like, well, I can't because I have $47 in my bank account.
Oh my gosh.
And so I was like, see, I can't follow it anyway. And I clicked it and it went through. The charge didn't show up on my card for 2 weeks. It was an in-app purchase. I don't know why it took 2 weeks, but it said, thank you for your purchase. And I saw this message, and this guy, his name was Matt, and he lived in Cedar Rapids, which is about 3.5 hours from where I live. The message was very clear that he had read my profile and was speaking to what I had written. So I sent a message back that night. This is a Wednesday. And the next day he started messaging me through the app. And I was at a softball game for my then 7-year-old. And we just kept talking, and I couldn't talk. My little didn't know that I went on dates. My youngest, she didn't know if I went on dates. She didn't know if I was ever talking to men because she really wanted a stepdad. Like, she was determined that she was getting a stepdad that summer. And I was like, that's not, I told her, I said, honey, that's not how it works. But she says, well, I need it this summer. Like, I need my stepdad this summer. And
Aww.
I'm like a dream coach. How am I supposed to like, I just want to
her dreams.
How do I shatter her dreams?
Yeah.
So I told her, I said, you know what? You write all the things that you want to feel with a stepdad. And so she wrote, it's so cute. She sat and wrote like her little vision board. She wanted him to hug like Paul, which is a friend at church. And she needed him to be grateful, and she wanted him to love her mom.
Aww.
And she had this pinned above her desk. And I couldn't tell her that was never going to happen because that would shatter her dreams. But in my mind, I'm like, that's never going to happen. And she's going to have to just learn the hard way. Like, because how do you teach her? You can't use the laws of thought on somebody else. Like, it was more than a 7-year-old could process. So she just left it there. So I started talking to this guy we were just messaging through the app. And he asked to call me, or maybe I said to call him to call me. I don't know. I'm sure he would have his own version of the whole story. But when Riley went to bed, we started talking. We talked late into that night, and I told him I couldn't talk. It wasn't actually late that night. I told him that I needed to get off because it was my older daughter's birthday. She was home from her mission by now and living in Provo. And so when she called, we got off the phone. And so we started talking the next night. And it was like 4:30 in the morning, 3:30 or 4:30 in the morning. And I finally was like, I actually have to get off the phone because my 17-year-old was coming home from a Nauvoo trip and on Saturday. And I said, we're leaving first thing Sunday morning to drive to Arizona, because I was supposed to have gone for this trial, but the trial wasn't going through. Mm-hmm. And so we got off the phone. And then a couple of hours later, I got up to just use the restroom. And I noticed that there was a Marco Polo from him on my phone. And I was like, oh, that's weird. We just got off the phone a couple of hours ago. And I look at it and I noticed that he was driving. I'm like, where is he driving at 7:00? And it dawned on me. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's not driving here. And so I opened this Marco Polo, and because I could see, like, it shows like a little blurb. And so I could see he was in the car. So this whole thought process went on in just a couple of seconds in my mind. And he didn't have my address, but the LDS singles profile says Portsmouth. It just said the town I lived in. And so he got up Saturday morning and had the thought, well, he couldn't sleep. And he had the thought, go see her. And so I wake up just to go to the bathroom. And he's driving like 3.5 hours to see me.
And you guys have only spoken on the phone once or twice now? Twice.
Wow.
Yeah. So he says, I don't have to come. You don't have to let me come. So I paused and like kind of checked in with the spirit, because this is either spirit driven or he's desperate. I don't know which it is yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
But timing wise, I needed to go to the city to get some shopping done in order to go on this cross country trip with my daughters. And so I had planned for my 7-year-old to go over to grandma's. So it was just happening to work out that he would get there about the time that my daughter was gone. Cause I said, you can't, cause he had been, I explained to him, you can't meet my kids. Like I can't just do that to my little one. And so when I realized that the timing was enough that he could meet me. And so I was honest, and I said, I can't go do anything with you. But if you really want to drive that far, just to meet me, you could go with me to the city. We could talk, and then you have to go back home as soon as I need to go pick up my daughter. And I'm like, that's a 3.5 hour drive both ways for you to hang out for just like an hour or two. Yeah. And he decided to keep coming. And of course, by this point, I knew one of the things that I had written in my vision is that I wanted this person to be living a rare faith lifestyle. And it didn't mean that they were living like they knew what rare faith was, right. But it was the idea of universal laws and faith combined. Mm-hmm. I needed that. That was really important to me. And on our first conversation, when, talking about what you do, and it came out that I was a coach in this rare faith, he's like, oh my gosh, what is that? And so I sent him a link to listen to the Jackrabbit Factor, and he just gobbled it up, because he had been reading things like Napoleon Hill and James Allen and all. So we had the same language. He just hadn't seen it from the faith perspective that I had. And so I take my daughter over to grandma's, and I come back, and by the time I get back to my house, he's sitting in the driveway. And so, literally the timing, it couldn't have been, clearly there was some divine intervention, kind of finagling all of this. And I pull up and I get out, and he asked if he could hug me, and I don't remember how it all went. We hugged and kissed. Okay. And I could tell what he was going to say. And I already could feel the moment that he put his arms around me, my entire nervous system just calmed. Wow. It was I went from years of fight or flight to this calmness that I had not experienced, ever. I'd never experienced what it felt like the moment that he put his arms around me. And I could feel my spirit just feel like it had come home. It had been searching for so long, and it was just there. And he looks at me, and I could see what was coming. And I said, don't say it. I said, just don't say it. And he said what I knew he was going to say. And he said, I think that I love you. And we've been talking for 48 hours. And the thing is that I knew it, I could feel it, but I didn't want to recognize it. So I said what any woman would say. And I said, oh, well, it's too soon to feel love. What you're feeling are simply the effects of the hormones designed to ensure the survival of the human race. And he just looks at me and says, hormones? I'm feeling hormones? No, actually, I didn't. My kids laugh. When they hear that he said he loved me, they said, Mom, please tell me that you didn't say thank you. And I said, no, I did not say thank you. And their next response was, okay, what did you say? Because it had to have been worse. And so we've all decided that was the worst response to an I love you ever, that it was just hormones. But it made him more determined to prove that he loved me. And we drove to the city, and on the drive back, I fell asleep next to him in the car. Like, I was exhausted, I was just exhausted, and I fell asleep. And then we said goodbye, we got back to my place, he dropped me off, and then he got in his car and he left, and I went and got my daughter. And I found out later that he took that, me falling asleep, that I was not attracted to him, that there was no connection or spark. But what I explained to him later is, I said I hadn't felt safe in the presence of a man in a very long time. So for my nervous system to be calm enough for me to fall asleep was actually what gave me the information I needed to know that this was the person I had been looking for.
Wow.
And so I went to Arizona. I was gone for almost 2 weeks, and I came home, and we just would see each other on the weekends because he lived 3.5 hours away. He had been married for 26 years before, when his marriage had ended, and his ex-wife had moved to Utah. So it was just easier for him to come see me. And then he proposed, and it was an easy yes. And
how long after, did he propose?
About a month from the time that we met, which almost 2 of those weeks I was in Arizona.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, my kids were kind of freaking out.
Yeah, I could see that.
The difference is that I had written about him, and what I didn't know when we first started, but I started learning later, is that he was writing about the person he wanted to be with. And so one of the things that we teach in Rare Faith is that what you want wants you back. And I have this documented evidence that the things that I wanted before he ever came into my physical world, he wanted what I had to offer. He wanted, and it was written in his journals, and he practiced gratitude and all of those things that I was doing. And then he's been able to learn it from the gospel perspective. And during the time, so when I said that I had been dating, and I was dating people that weren't members of the church also, because let's be honest, the LDS mid-singles, it's kind of a scary community. I hate to say it, but it's terrifying. And because they know your standards, they know what words to use. It's actually not, it's just not I didn't have any really good experiences with it. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
And during this time, I had felt really led to reading Jacob chapter 5. And one of the verses, I thought I had it written, but it doesn't. I'm going to pull it up. In Jacob 5. In verse 14, it says, "And it came to pass that the Lord of the vineyard went his way and hid the natural branches of the tame olive tree and the nethermost parts of the vineyard, some in one and some in another, according to his will and pleasure." And then later, the Lord and the servant go out to that, nethermost part of the vineyard. And in verse 21, it says, "And it came to pass that the servant said unto his master, How comest thou hither to plant this tree, or this branch of the tree? For behold, it was the poorest spot in all the land of thy vineyard. And the Lord of the vineyard said unto him, Counsel me not. I knew that it was a poor spot of ground. Wherefore I said unto thee, I have nourished it this long time, and thou beholdest that it hath brought forth much fruit." And when I read that at the time, I just felt like there was the message that I needed to hear in it was to not judge by appearances. And then I thought it was saying, like, I was being given permission to date outside of the gospel, and that maybe they weren't bearing the fruit, or it was, a part of the vineyard that I wouldn't necessarily think would bear fruit. And so that was what I had taken away from it. But then when I was engaged to Matt, there was just some things that I learned that weren't catastrophic, but pieces that for someone that was a member of the church were deal breakers for me. The biggest of which was I didn't want to be left in a marriage where I was the one going to the temple on a regular basis, and he either stopped going or went for me. I didn't actually want to go to the temple together if it was for me.
Right.
And so it was a total deal breaker that he had to be going to the temple before we met. Like that's something that was part of his routine, so that I never had to question why he was going. And when I realized that actually wasn't happening, I was questioning moving forward. And I remember specifically this one day that I was just standing and I was staring at him from across the room, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. This is the thought in my head. And the words were so clear, Jacob chapter 5. I already knew this. And so I had already been given the direction. I already knew that he was the person I was going to marry. And so when the Jacob chapter 5 popped into my mind, I had been prepared. That was read, and I had understood it and written about it before I ever met Matt. And so we decided to set the date, and the date ended up being a lot earlier than we were originally planning, because we were going to go meet my family in Arizona. But my dad can't travel anymore. So it just kind of made more sense to just get married in Arizona, which was amazing because Leslie Householder came to my wedding in Arizona, and all my Rare Faith friends that were right there, like most of them were there I threw this wedding together in like 3 weeks. And I did not share with Matt the date of my vision that I had written. He knew that I had something written, but I didn't share it with him because I never wanted to manipulate. Right. I didn't want him to feel any kind of pressure. But the date of my relationship vision was July 31st, 2023. And Matt and I were married on July 29th, 2023. So on July 31st,
wow. I woke in a healthy marital relationship.
So July 31st, 2023, I am so happy and grateful that I am in a healthy marriage relationship. It was all true.
Wow. That is so crazy.
Crazy.
Oh my gosh. I just want to stop the show and just go write down all my things with all my dates right now, but I'm not going to put dates so far out. I'm not as
Well, I was in the middle of a divorce, so I had to.
Yeah. Wow. That is so cool. Oh my gosh. So tell us where you are now on your journey, how does life look for you? And, I don't know, just kind of, where's your testimony at with all of this? And,
you would think that this is such an amazing story, and it really is. Like, it's this amazing story, and it always was. But we got married, and I have PTSD. I have CPTSD, which is complex PTSD, which is from ongoing emotional abuse, basically.
Yeah.
And there's things even from my childhood, but mostly from different aspects of one or both marriages. And so now I'm in this relationship, and my subconscious, which is, thankfully, I have such a strong understanding of neuroscience, thanks to what I've learned through Leslie's work. Yep. But my subconscious was in complete freak out, and it couldn't accept that I was safe. And so the first year of our marriage was actually really, really hard. And I literally married a saint. I can't even say how many times he's had to pick me up off the floor from a full-blown PTSD meltdown where I'm just, for me, so he had been in either therapy, trying to save his first marriage together with her or for himself for, years and years before me. And so one of the things that he was doing was he would practice mindfulness because he's had struggles with anger in the past. And so when there would be a conflict arise between us, his go-to was to just kind of retreat inside of himself, but it wasn't it wasn't the silent treatment. He was using mindfulness techniques. But my previous experiences had been that was the calm before the storm. and it was just about to erupt. And I mean, there were times that the yelling, it was so bad that would come at me that I would sleep on the garage floor. Like there was a section of the garage that was not our room, but I didn't want anybody in the house to know that what was going on. And so I would just sleep on the garage floor. And so for me, my experience has said that when my partner gets quiet in the middle of conflict, he's about to erupt. And for him, he needed to get quiet to process so he didn't erupt.
Right.
And so it was, there was a lot. It was a lot. And thankfully, I say it was perfect, but it was perfect because we had both learned how to be vulnerable. We had both learned how to deal with our stuff. It wasn't his fault. He wasn't the reason I was behaving this way. And it wasn't my fault for why he behaved certain ways. All of that personal development work that we had done before we ever met is what kept us through. And then there was a lot that happened in our first year. I almost lost my 17-year-old daughter in December of last year. And so we're dealing with that. And then we had to move. I had back surgery. So here we are newly married, and he has to, like, back surgery is no joke, guys. It is no joke. And, you know, he stayed at my hospital bedside and then helped me through that whole recovery process. And then we moved, and we ended up, there was a lot of things that went around it, but essentially all of the financial resources that he came into the marriage with and everything that I had coming, it all stopped. It either was depleted or it stopped. And this summer, and it was at the time that my daughter was getting married in Utah, and we were in the middle of this move. And so it just felt like we had lost everything. But even in that, we have been able to draw closer in a way that would never have happened without that. For him, his worth, his whole, who he was tied up in his being a provider, in supporting the family. And so when that was kind of taken, he's been able to experience that he doesn't have to give anything to be loved. He is loved and accepted and needed in exactly the space that he is. I don't need anything from him. And he couldn't have really understood that without where we are. And for myself, he doesn't blame me. He doesn't blame me. Both of my previous husbands have, you know, I'm blamed for every single thing that went wrong. And I'm not saying that I didn't have my faults, because I absolutely did. I absolutely contributed to the first divorce. I would say, with all honesty, it was the mental health in the second divorce that ultimately led to the divorce. But, so we're just rebuilding. We're at a point, but we get to rebuild together. And, he has supported everything that I do. He feels really strongly that I need to be sharing my story and that I need to continue coaching. And I have felt like I don't know how to do this anymore because it's not actually supporting my family, because I have clients, but I continue attracting clients that are coming from the spaces of where I used to be. Those are the ones that I can help the most, but they're also the ones that don't typically have the resources or even the mental strength to know that there is more on the other side. And so out of that has been born, Leslie Householder and I are co-founding a nonprofit, and it is in its launch phase right now. And we are so excited about it.
Wow. And so do you want to, I mean, I know you guys have a name, but you're not ready to release it just yet, or?
It should be able to be released tomorrow.
Oh, well then you can share, because this is a recorded episode and it's going to air a little after we record. How about that? Or yes. I mean, I don't want, no pressure if you're like...
No, I'd actually thought about that, and I actually feel confident because I thought, you know what, it's probably not going to come out until tomorrow or the next day, whenever it comes out anyway. So it's the Breakthrough Foundation.
Oh, perfect.
So because so many times we feel broken. And what I've learned is that I'm not broke. I was never broken. I was just breaking through the past beliefs.
I love that.
Yeah, that's a really nice play
That's
on words.
really cool.
Yeah. And so, yeah, and even foundation. I mean, foundation is typically used in nonprofits, but for us, it's the breakthrough foundation.
Mhm.
It's giving the tools and the resources and support so people could just get to the foundation. Because when I started my whole personal development journey, I wasn't even at foundation. Like I was in the basement. I couldn't even get to the foundation. And
Right.
And I approached Leslie with this idea of a nonprofit because for a lot of reasons, but part of it was, yes, my life has been forever changed by the curriculum and the things that I've learned in Rare Faith. But it wasn't just that. There were people in the community, the Rare Faith community in Facebook, who would see my plight. They would see my struggles and they would reach out to me. And it was truly like their support and their service to me. Some of them had gifts and, modalities of healing that would help me, even though I was still in therapy and the things that I was doing, but they had resources and ways that I was being lifted and carried through this journey while I was also doing the Rare Faith and curriculum. And it was through that kind of comprehensive support that got me to where I am. And so that's what we're excited is we're going to be able to get to offer more of that comprehensive support. And I don't know a single Rare Faith facilitator, including Leslie herself, that hasn't had scholarshiped people in. And sometimes there's funds available for the scholarship and sometimes there's not. And we as facilitators or the company itself would just absorb those costs because how do you not share these things that are helping people and pulling them out of past beliefs that are actually drawing them closer to the Savior? It's not just about goals. How do you not? But I had gotten to where I'm like, I can't do this because I can't support my family. I can't do it anymore. And so when I had this idea of a nonprofit, it was actually just for me. And then the Spirit said, no, you're thinking too small. And I was like, I don't know how this is too small because this is a lot bigger than me. And I happened to be in a class with Leslie at the moment that this inspiration came to me. And I looked at my screen and I was like, oh. So I just decided to just have a conversation with her. And she just immediately saw the vision of what this could do. And the resources, I mean, it was such a good idea, but it's so huge. Now we're just, we're knee deep in it, but everything has come together. We found an organization that's helping us get it up off the ground and compliant. They have 100% compliance rate with the IRS since 1995.
Nice.
Which is just, I didn't even know there was 100% in anything anymore.
Yeah.
And so by tomorrow is when I'm supposed to have the legal entity incorporated through the state of Iowa that we're going to get word and once that's created, we can start accepting donations that will be retroactively tax deductible.
That's awesome.
So the IRS allows 27 months to get your tax exempt status. And because this organization that's doing it all for us, the IRS piece, has 100% acceptance rate at the IRS for decades now. We just feel really confident, and we already have people that are ready to sponsor. I have a retreat that I'm doing in a week and a half. That's like kind of it's like the launch event of this new organization. And the board of directors in fact, one board member in particular, when she was first approached by Leslie, she kind of was like, I don't know. That's a lot. I've been on boards. I don't know if I can do that. I could be, as long as I don't have a lot of responsibilities. But then a week later, when I messaged her, maybe it's a couple weeks, and said, this is where we're at, her reply back was, the Spirit had directed her that she actually needed to hold a role, that if we needed responsibilities from her, that's where she is going, because she felt, so each of these people that have become our board of directors has felt prompted by the Spirit that that's what they need to do.
Wow. And so essentially what you're doing is you're offering scholarship programs to help coach people for free, right? Or is it free or just for free, who
both
maybe aren't quite at the point where they actually understand why coaching is so helpful, right? And where they don't even understand like the basic of the principles of, you know, all the rare faith teachings and things like that, right?
Yeah, and it's being built right now as far as exactly how the program is going to go. But I'm doing some of the inspiration that I have for it is this program that I went through with this coach that introduced me to Leslie's work. So where there's some creative modalities, some creative processing, whether it's writing or art, different ways that we can process through the thoughts that we have. And that's one of the things that we do in Genius Bootcamp is tapping into the creative side of our brain. And then for those that need additional support, there's the potential to have, contracted assistance on an as needed basis for things like EFT, which is tapping or emotional freedom techniques. So there's other modalities. It doesn't take the place of professional counseling when that's needed. This is just one of the greatest things that I love about coaching is that you're not bound by HIPAA. And so, with my clients, I have pretty firm boundaries. As far as I love using the Marco Polo app because if somebody really needs to process something, they can do it right then and there. And then I will get it when I have a moment. I turn my phone to silent at night. But that ability to communicate with the person that you're working with outside of your scheduled 45-minute appointment, however often you see, is really what has helped me the most. And it's why I love coaching and mentoring. And one of the things that I feel I have been gifted with is to know when my client needs a coach, someone to kind of push them outside of their comfort zone and, be the one on the back end, getting them moving. And when they need a mentor, when they need the person to sit with them in the dark and they don't need to be coached, they don't need to be told what they could do better. And I feel like that is one of the things that all of my experience has gifted me with, because there were times that I did not need anybody to tell me what to do better. I just needed someone to sit with me in it.
Right.
And then I've had my tail kicked a lot of times by a lot of mentors that were like, you are better than this and you can do better. And so that is the vision that we're creating. And I'm so excited about it.
Oh, that is so cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, I have to vouch for, I mean, I know I've talked so much on this podcast in the last couple of years about Leslie Householder and Rare Faith and just the things that I've learned and how it lines up so beautifully with the gospel. I think for me, just like you were saying, it actually has fortified my testimony of the gospel even more, because it helped me to understand more about like Heavenly Father's divine role, like who he is, how he organized everyone and everything, why it is so important for us to completely heal ourselves, with the help of the atonement and with the help of all of the other resources that God gives to us. And I love that it helps you to become that full force co-creator with God. It's not like you're waiting around, for God to work everything out for you anymore. It's like he has endowed us with this power, with his power, to be able to multiply and replenish the earth in such a way that it branches out beyond just having kids, right? Like I know a lot of that's like my favorite thing about what I learned in Rare Faith was like, it is absolutely our job to multiply and replenish all the good that we can, right? To multiply and replenish healing, growth, progression, forgiveness, perseverance. It's our responsibility to multiply financially so that we have more multiplied opportunities for people. It's our responsibility to multiply all of the charitable things and the service that is out there. That's all part of living the law of consecration, which is just one of the covenants that we adhere to and that we make when we go through the temple is to really truly consecrate every single thought, deed, action, opportunity to Heavenly Father, to his plan. And I have just been on this like kick where it's like I'm thirsty and I cannot get enough of it. And I remember being at a point years ago where I would never have considered a coach because I would have thought that's a waste of money. Why do I want to pay someone who is just going to talk to me about my feelings or whatever? Like I did not understand what it meant to work hand in hand with someone else who is also trying to create good things in life. And I'm like a coaching addict now. Like I do all the things. I mean, I'm sure anyone who's listened to this show long enough has been like, Alicia, do you like try everything that every person yeah, I probably do. Yeah. I'm like, yes, teach me more. I just want to know more. But I love that you didn't give up, number one, right? And that you were like, even though you felt like a hypocrite in some of those times, and I can only imagine like how hard that would be and how much of a struggle that could have been for you to be like, am I not living with integrity because I'm not actually seeing all this stuff? But the point is that you didn't quit because you knew that there was power in the way that Heavenly Father has structured all of the blessings that we're privy to in this life and in the next. And I love that you earlier when we were talking about like your intro, you talked about how you felt like there was this messy middle where you were just in this storm surrounded by fog and you just didn't know what was happening. You didn't know what the purpose was. And it wasn't until you got through all of that, till you navigated outside of the fog and away, like far enough away from the storm where, yeah, maybe you were still wet, maybe it's still raining, but you're not in the middle of the ocean anymore. You're kind of like, okay, now I at least have my feet on the ground. I'm on the shoreline and I can see I'm safe. Still maybe not super comfortable, but I'm getting better. And just knowing that you all of a sudden are able to start seeing with that eternal perspective. Like you're able to, I think about President Nelson's talk where, think celestially, right? Like that is what I personally have experienced going through the rare faith stuff, is that it has helped me to be able to think celestial, like to really get that God perspective in all different areas to where I no longer have to be the victim. And I don't have to make anybody else the bad guy either.
Right.
I don't have to make my circumstances the bad guy. I don't have to make my husband the bad guy when when we're not agreeing on something, or my kids the bad guy for not doing what I want them to do or living how I want them, or whatever it is. There doesn't have to even be a bad guy. It's just, oh, that's interesting. That's something that I am in right now, or I'm dealing with right now. And now I can apply these principles and I can move forward to create something more beautiful. So I'm excited to see what your foundation is going to do, because I think there are so many people in the world who just they're so deep in the rut that they really can't even see any light at all. So to ask them to not only like build something outside of that hole when they're like, honestly, they don't even know they're in a hole. Probably. They're like, it's dark. I don't even know where I'm at. You
don't. And one of the things when I was in the middle of, before I had moved to Iowa and I was doing homework, and I took a rare moment to sit down and watch a movie with I think she was 2 or 3 at the time, but we watched Moana. I hadn't seen it when it was in the theaters. And I have a coaching practice, and it's wayfinder mentoring and coaching. And it's wayfinding is from Moana. It's the first time that I was introduced to the term. But one of the first kind of things that I wrote, because I'm a writer now and I'm working on getting a book out, and I'm just kind of coming out of that fog that I was in after that first year of marriage. And I'm really excited about it. But there was a part in Moana where, she is so excited and she's out there and she realizes that she's off course. And so she looks to the ocean and asks for help. And the ocean is, a representation of our Heavenly Father. For me, that's what it represents to me. And she looks and asks for help. And this huge storm comes and it knocks her off off of her boat and it kind of breaks apart and she's just clinging for dear life in the waves. And you see her the next take, you see her waking, she gets up on the beach and she's so mad and she goes over and she's kicking the water and she says, "Fish pee in you." Like, she's so mad. I asked you for help. And then the ocean pulls, a wave up and it kind of points and she turns around and she can see that she's on the island of where Maui is at.
Mm-hmm.
And she realizes that storm that, she thought she was off course. And then this storm blows her even further, but it actually blew her to where she needed to be. And I feel like the moment that I was yelling at God and I was so mad and I said, I did this hate letter. It's like he pointed to me and said, "Look." And I feel like I'm finally on that island. And just like in Moana, that her journey wasn't over. She didn't reach that island of Maui. And then it was all she still had a lot in front of her, but she was no longer doing it alone.
Mm-hmm.
And she had learned just a little bit. And I feel like that's where I've learned just enough that I feel like I have the evidence on the other side of that storm that says there's actually purpose, and it's not likely that it's just a random storm. It's actually taking you to where you're asking to be in the first place.
I love that.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of power and strength that comes from the journey.
For sure.
And I mean, I actually love the fact that you were coaching people and struggling at the same time. You just hadn't reached the destination yet. And that becomes part of your story, right? And because of that, look where it took you. Look where the storm took you, to create a foundation where you can actually help people who are at the bottom of, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're barely surviving. Now you can relate to them and you can actually give them a place to start. So they're not just drowning in the ocean. You're handing them a life raft and be like, "Help me. I can help you get to the shore." So then you can actually continue on your journey. You don't drown. I think it's awesome.
It's interesting that you said that, because the Maslow's hierarchy of needs has been a really big piece of why I am so insistent that there are truly people that are not just limiting their beliefs as far as not hiring a coach or not enrolling in a program that could help them, because they don't know what they don't know. When you are on that bottom rung of that hierarchy of needs, you can't reach your fulfillment. You can't reach your destiny. And, I, as a bookkeeper, when I was using my accounting degree, I worked the nonprofit. I did their books, and I love seeing so many nonprofits that are helping in other countries. And I'm also glad that was not my calling. I've lived out of this country and I'm good. But we have really significant needs here. And they look like the girl that's just, I don't look at a mom in a grocery store with a screaming child that she's completely ignoring. I don't look at them the same. They aren't poor parents. They aren't or the one that is like, no, and this is fine, just put it all in the basket. They are fighting for survival. That was me. They don't know. And one of the greatest blessings in my life has been having a child at 41 years old, because not only have I got to be a different parent for her, but that relationship with my older children has been healed and is continuing to heal, because they are witnessing their mom. I don't just get to say, well, I could have been a better mom if I had known XYZ. They're actually watching me be a better mom to their little sister. Yeah. And so that has in turn helped to heal those things that I did really, really wrong when they were younger. So
I love that.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, this has just been such a good, I knew it was going to be such a good episode. And I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your story and sharing a little bit about the foundation, what you guys have going on. It's So I guess like before we wrap up, are there, do you have any last thoughts or anything like that? Would you like to share a little bit about maybe what people can do if they want to get in touch with you, either for the foundation aspect or for more information on your personal coaching or someone else's program, like the Genius Bootcamp or whatever else? So I guess give us all the things.
They could reach out to me personally, either my email or they can find me on social media. There's depending on what the needs are, there's a few avenues. So I offer personal coaching. If you're in a space that you're ready to invest in yourself, I offer that. If you're wanting more of like, if you want something, everything that I do has some Rare Faith into it, whether I pull in the curriculum from Rare Faith because I'm a facilitator. That's just part of what I do. But also if somebody is looking more to be in, a class where there's more than one, a bigger class, then I would send them the resources that they need for that. But if they're in a place that they know that they want to grow, but they're not sure how to do that, then it's going to fall under the foundation. And if somebody hears this and feels like they would like to donate, again, because we don't have all the links, we actually do have the URL set up, but it's a process as we wait for the entity to incorporate in Iowa, which is expected to be tomorrow to get the paperwork back for that. But they could just contact me directly and I'll just put them into the place that they need to be.
Okay,
so
perfect. Well, we'll make sure to put all of the things that we can at the time that we air this episode. We'll make sure we put everything in the description for others, so that they can reach out and get in touch with you. And of course, if all else fails, reach out to Scott and I. We can get in touch. We can do that. So
I was hoping that we would have it all set up by today. It just took a little bit longer through Iowa than we expected. So
that happens.
Yeah. I really need to read this Jackrabbit book. I need to learn more about Leslie Housel. We've talked about it so many times. And I love reading. I'm constantly reading. So I need a kick in the butt.
Well, and my favorite is not even the Jackrabbit Factor, which I know a lot of people like, but mine is Hidden Treasures. Like, man, one is just, it's got scriptures. It's so clearly, just in what's the word? It's like woven into the gospel. And that is my favorite. I tell everybody about Hidden Treasures. It's not even Jackrabbit Factor is great too, but I just went straight to Hidden Treasures.
I love Hidden Treasures. For me, Jackrabbit Factor was like this eye-opening, what the possibilities. Mm-hmm. But Hidden Treasures is where, it's
like going deeper.
Well, my faith is such a big part of me that honestly, if I had learned about the law of attraction, I would have dismissed it. Mm-hmm. If I had learned all that from the worldview, I would have just dismissed it as just woo-woo. But because it's integrated throughout the scriptures, and that is actually the best part of what Leslie teaches. And she's actually creating, she taught it when we were just on the cruise that we all went on. Mm-hmm. Or several people went on, that the difference between the law of attraction and Rare Faith. In the law of attraction, the one that stood out to me the most that she put on the PowerPoint was in the law of attraction. It says that if you're not getting, you're not seeing the results that you should be, then you're doing it wrong. And so I had dubbed myself the Rare Faith failure because that was how I kept seeing it. But she has this other piece of it that's when you put God in it's God helps us learn that just because you can doesn't mean you should. Mm-hmm. And he cares more about our growth than he does our wealth. Mm-hmm. And so the wealth is fine, but he cares about the growth first. And so I am so grateful I didn't receive the wealth first, or I wouldn't have what I have now.
Yeah. Well, for anyone interested, you guys can go to rarefaith.org and there are free downloads of both of those books. I know that they have them on Audible as well that you guys can purchase if you want to, but if you just want to read it for free, you can absolutely go read it for free. So go do it. Yep. It'll just help your testimony so much of the gospel. And of how much our Heavenly Father like loves us and just puts so many things in our path for us to be able to use. And it doesn't have to be like, it can be hard, but it doesn't have to feel impossible, you know, like it really, I don't know. Anyway, I'm gonna step off my pedestal now because I feel like
it's a good pedestal. It's a good one. So.
It's a good one. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit, and I tried to condense it, and it still just, and that was honestly the cliff notes. There was so many miracles, and there was even more trials than that. Those were the big ones.
Well, it's awesome that you're going to be able to put it into a book, and then people can go read the hours and hours of the book when you get that done.
Yeah.
So. Awesome. Well, thanks, Bethany. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to listen to Bethany's story. Hopefully, you've learned something new. You've been inspired. And, if you want to help spread Bethany's story, go hit that share button and do your 5-second missionary work. And let's get this out there. Because I know there's people that could use this information and get inspired from Bethany's story.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, guys, Scott and I love when people reach out to us and we don't have to go track you down. So just if you're feeling the little feelings and Heavenly Father's like, hey, we want to hear from you. We want to know what your story is. We want to know how your testimony has grown and what type of storms that you've navigated in your life that are going to, help you to have a more eternal perspective of things. So please, please, please reach out to us. You can either message us on Facebook. You can send us an email at latterdaylights@gmail.com, or you can head over to latterdaylights.com, our webpage. And at the bottom, there's a place where you can fill out a contact form. So we would just be so thrilled to have you guys reach out to us with your stories of faith and light and inspiration so that we can keep this show going and keep reaching others who really need to have more light in their life. So with that, thank you guys for listening. We really appreciate it. And thank you again, Bethany, for coming on today.
Thank you.
Yeah. See you next week with another episode. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.